This video is a continuation from the previous video on character development. Okay, so analogies. Everybody knows what the word, everybody has heard the word, but not everybody can define the word. So in order to create a great story, we're going to start with an analogy, okay? So what is an analogy? Well, let's talk about that. So by textbook definition, an analogy is essentially a comparison in which an idea or an object is compared to another thing that is very different from it. It aims at explaining that idea or thing by comparing it to something that's familiar. It basically compares two completely different things by looking for the similarities between the two things or concepts. And it only focuses on that angle. And as you begin to become more aware of things that are used, strategies that are used in the development of animation, you're going to see those analogies more and more. Quite often people will watch an animation and have no idea there was an analogy going on. So here's an example. In William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, she says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, still be as sweet." So she's indirectly saying, she's comparing Romeo to a rose, right? They're nothing alike, right? A man and a rose are polar opposites to some people. And she's saying that because the rose will always smell sweet, no matter what name it is called, you change the name of a rose to Daisy or Petunia, it still smells sweet. It doesn't matter what name it has. So she's saying that she will love Romeo no matter what his name is. And because in the story, they were feuding clans, so his name was problematic. So she was comparing him to the rose to make an analogy. And so we do this quite a bit in filmmaking and in animation, is that we find ways to tell our story or to make a point through the use of analogy, by taking something that is comfortable and familiar to our audience and turning it into a new and novel way of explaining things. Let's see. Okay, so for instance, an analogy would be, that's as useful as rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. What it means is it looks like you're doing something helpful, but it really will make no difference in the end. So if you had an animation and your characters are rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, the analogy in the story is that they're just doing busy work while the impending disaster is happening, and they're not doing anything to save it. Right? That's how the analogy becomes part of the story. Okay, the next analogy. That movie was a roller coaster ride of emotions. And so what it means is that while you're not literally flying through the air, the twists and turns and surprises of a movie plot can leave you feeling like you've been through quite an experience. So how would that relate into a story? Well, if we want someone watching our animation to come away feeling like they've been on a roller coaster ride of emotions, we want them to feel like they've been through an experience, we can change how our cameras move to make it feel like they're flying through the air, the twists, the turns, the surprises of being on a roller coaster, the ups and downs. Right? We can use our camera, we can use our movements in our story to give that feeling to people. So when they come through at the end, they will feel connected to our character in a way that now makes them understand that character's experience. Okay. I'm as graceful as a refrigerator falling down a flight of stairs. Okay. So what this means is it's actually sarcastic. So just think about the noise and destruction of a refrigerator literally tumbling down a flight of stairs from top to bottom. Now imagine that's your character. Except instead of a refrigerator, your character is an adorable elephant who keeps tripping over his own trunk and falls down this flight of stairs. And then someone at the bottom, his little friend, says, "That was graceful." So you see how that, and having that analogy helps you define your story. Because obviously at the end of this animation, the elephant's going to figure out how to, he and his little friend are going to figure out this clever way that he's going to not trip over his own trunk anymore by tying in a knot or something. And we now have a story, and it's cute, and it makes for a great animation, and it's heartwarming because people who are not graceful will relate to that. Okay. So analogies come with built-in properties and natural limitations, which makes them very useful for designing in general. And so we use them quite often. Symbolism can help us with those analogies, since symbols are analogous in terms of what they represent. For instance, I just watched a movie called American Honey, where at the end of the movie, the main male character gives the main female character a turtle, and she sets the turtle free, goes in the water. Oh, I don't want to ruin the movie, but sorry. And so the turtle, I looked up the symbolism for the turtle, and the turtle is independent. Independence represents independence. It also represents your ability to be someone who you're carrying your shell, you're carrying your house on your back, so you're able to take care of yourself, right? And so there was that symbolism in that movie with that turtle. And don't let me have ruined it for anybody. Watch it. It's a great movie. It's a really good movie. And the symbolism in that movie was really good. So we are also going to use symbolism in our stories that help with analogies, because, for instance, if you have an object that is symbolic in your story, it becomes the analogy, in the sense that if you have a piece of candy, what does it represent? What is its symbolism? It's sweet, right? And so that symbolism can become your analogy in your story. So we also use our analogies to decide who our characters are, what they look like, and what they should do in order to most effectively tell our story. The core analogy helps to define the story. And again, there's another character from Fortnite, and he has a story. I don't know what his story is, but he has one. You look at him, you see there's a story there. So analogy gives our stars of the show, gives us the stars of our show, right? Gives us our characters. Secondly, it helps us make style selections for our scenes and settings. It helps us define the principles and elements of design. And then third, it defines the rules that help us select artistic preferences. Actually, I just said that a minute ago, right? So colors, sound, shapes, principles, and elements. The rules don't have to be elaborate, and you don't need a lot of them. You just need the right ones to bring the story to life and add the element of fantasy. Okay, so clearly when you look at this character from Fortnite, and you can see these are sketches that were done by the artists who designed and developed her. And then this is the final modeled animation. And in this, you can see there's very clear choices based on what her analogy is. And she's clearly the antithesis of the sweet little girl, right? She's got on pink and green, and she's carrying candy, but she's clearly a warrior, and she's going to go fight in a battle. Good analogies are like inventions. You can learn some rules to help dream them up, but ultimately it's a creative act and it can't be fully controlled. Okay, what this means is, and you may have heard this term before, it's called artistic license. And what that means is essentially that you, as the artist, you establish your analogy and you hold true to it. But sometimes like we do with principles and elements of design. You break those rules. Um, every artist breaks rules. Once you get comfortable with the rules, the idea is that you will break them. Okay. So the nice thing is that you're using your story and your analogy. You're using an analogy to build your story to build your animation, but you have artistic license to make tweaks here and there to make sure you hold true to your artistic vision. Okay. And one of the things you want to do when you're learning, about this, you want to look for other analogies that people have already generated. And again, watch animations, see if you can figure out what the analogies are. Every animation that I can think of off the top of my head uses analogy and symbolism to connect the known to the new story that you're telling. You're connecting people to something that is comfortable to them, to something new and unfamiliar. And I will tell you guys, that is the heart of what makes characters memorable, what makes stories timeless. There has to be two things, and this is true of all design. There needs to be something very comfortable and familiar for people to connect to, but at the same time, it needs to be presented in a novel and interesting way that brings them in and engages them and makes them want to know more. And that's it. And that's what all this is telling you is you need the familiarity and the newness to get people hooked on what you're doing. Okay, I'm going to stop this video here, and we will continue in the next one, and we'll pick up right here where we're leaving off.